with Joe Nash on Limerick's Live 95 FM.
We're going to move on and talk about Limerick Regeneration, and figures reveal that almost €258 million has been spent on the Limerick Regeneration project since 2008, which works out at an average of €28 million a year. However, in that time, over 1,000 buildings have been demolished, with just 110 housing units put in their place. So, what is working and what isn't with regeneration, and where is it going from this point forward? With me in the studio are Independent Councillor John Gilligan and Cathal McCarthy from Limerick Regeneration Watch, and you're both welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for coming in. And also on the line is Jennifer O'Brien, who is manager of South Hill Area Centre. Jennifer, thank you for joining us
Morning.
as well. Now, we don't want to get into too much of a history lesson here, but let's just go back to 2008 and the big fanfare around Limerick Regeneration. And at the time, the commitment was for €3 billion to be spent on it, and we're now looking at 258 million. Still a lot of money, but far, far less.
Yes, I accept that it is far, far less, and I also regret to say that much of the money has been simply wasted. And whereas we don't want to go into a history lesson, I think we must take a look back at what happened. And one of the biggest things and the best things that changed was the whole question of security within estates. The original idea was to demolish something like 3,000 houses, and they were to be replaced with 2,450. Now, the extra houses, over 500 houses, had been, as it says in the book, vacated, abandoned or burnt out. Now, if you take it at a minimum of 50,000 each to replace it, that's over 25 million worth of housing in stock in Limerick City was simply burnt to the ground, and not one single person was convicted or tried for that. And that's disgraceful. And that was the big thing that changed.
But at the time, lots of people were saying this was about greenfield developments, this was about getting rid of the past and looking to the future, and the physical infrastructure was part of that.
Yes, but before anything had happened, and that's the plus that I'm trying to make as regards regeneration. Before anything could happen, and they were right, first of all, security had to be reintroduced back in. It was simply abandoned. I mean, the 450 houses, they represented family homes, or, a lot of them would have been...
What should have happened there?
A little bit of law and order, a cop turning up every now and again. But you could... we allowed...
But the houses themselves...
they were simply bulldozed.
Yeah. And are you saying they should have just been worked on rather than bulldozed?
Well, I don't think we should have allowed it to happen to begin with. But as they say, they were vacated, abandoned and burnt out. So they drove people out of houses, they happily burnt them, and nobody did anything about it. And we were screaming stop for a long time. Yeah. So I must say
just to be clear on what you're saying, was regeneration right then in those instances to finally get rid of those houses?
I don't think that they had any option at that. But they did have to come back and redesign entire areas. And it was only specific areas. I'm happy to say that in St Mary's Park, which has 463 houses, not one single house before regeneration was blocked up. Not one. And you go down and take a look at it. After all these years, it looks like it's been bombed by the Luftwaffe or something like that. It's kind of...
Today?
Today, yeah.
Yeah, okay. We'll come back to you. Cathal, €3 billion. I mean, was that a flight of fancy of the height of the Celtic Tiger just before the collapse?
Well, it wasn't really a commitment to money. I think the state were going to have given a commitment to invest $1.3 billion, and much of that money wasn't actually cash. It represented the value of the land they intended to hand over to the developer, because it was ultimately going to be a public-private partnership model they were going to use, as they had used in Dublin, in Fatima Mansions and Ballymun. So they were going to try and replicate that here. And much of what happened over those years, regeneration actually made it worse. Security actually decreased, because you had people, they were depopulating the areas, they were moving people out. They were boarding their houses up as they left. Those houses were subsequently looted for copper and burnt out. And that forced more people to leave. So you had people's constitutional right to their property undermined, as homeowners were turned into tenants. So the council bought a house elsewhere in the city and moved homeowners out. They gave them compensation of around 30,000 and turned them into a tenant.
Without choice?
Well, they had a choice. They signed a contract to do that. But if you're an elderly couple, having lived your life, paid for your home, had no mortgage left, but you're left sandwiched between, say, two boarded up houses, and you find there's parties going on every night in the house next to you, and you're worried about your house being set on fire because the houses next door might go up, then you'll find your choices are very limited. You want to get out.
So was the principle of house building right?
No. There was very little physically wrong with the houses. What the state was doing and what the council colluded in was in a land clearance. They were clearing the land. I think it was disgusting that anyone could decide to demolish 3,000 homes without actually talking to the people first.
And what was the point of the land clearance, as you put it?
To redevelop the land. Now, in the 2008 master plan, it was interesting to read that with regards to social housing, they weren't going to build any social housing only for the tenants that remained when they came to build. Now, if all the tenants are gone, you're going to have an area with no social housing. And they did that in Dublin, in certain areas in Dublin, where they cleared out whole areas of tenants and they rebuilt private apartments. Now, while the plan said 250,000 extra houses will be built or units, it didn't add up, because in Ballinacurra Western, for example, where they were going to demolish 250 occupied homes, they were going building 5-storey apartment blocks and that kind of thing. It was going to be a very different looking area.
Jennifer, some people, and we're already getting calls and texts along these lines, believe that Limerick would have been better off if we had never heard of the concept of regeneration or Limerick Regeneration. What would you say to that?
I suppose my own experience, Joe, I can understand why people are having that sense, and you're getting those kind of messages this morning. I think one of the key issues that has happened over the past number of years has been around a failure in a good communication strategy with the local communities and trying to, I suppose, develop the idea of what regeneration was supposed to be about, communicate that effectively, and to actually listen to what people wanted on the ground. Like from what Cathal and John were saying, when it started, it was all, hearts and lollipops. Everybody was going to get a new house. It was going to be key for key. You were going to get this fabulous new building, and that obviously everything changed.
And was part of the problem that from day one, people looked at that and thought, this is not deliverable?
I think quite a lot of people within the communities are like, why are we being told this? And there's a long history of being promised things that never really, I suppose, were followed through on. And we would have experienced that a little bit with our own project as well, with the area centres, that people were saying, God, you're starting to build this, but sure, we've been told loads of times we're getting projects. And the actual completion of our project was a real sign, I think, that, positive things can happen. But the demolition of 1,000 houses and the building of 110 across the city is not enough for people to really believe that the process is going to be achieved, I think, at the moment.
Right. Tom has been in touch on 461-995 to say regeneration has completely let us down. It is an utter failure. The first meeting in 2008 out in Moyross said every house was to be knocked in Moyross. Then they said half the houses were going to be knocked. Then a different plan was made out. The plan was never stuck to. The plan continually changed over the years. Mary says, I'm listening to Councillor John Gilligan and I completely agree with what he's saying. The money has been completely wasted. Marie says, people in Dublin promised to put people back in the houses when they were rebuilt, but they weren't. Hundreds of people were driven out of their homes, but there was nothing done to help these people whatsoever. Let me ask this question,
yes,
which can be termed in ways to be the more difficult question. Where has Limerick Regeneration been a success?
Well, that's the point I was trying to make. It has been a success in that the amount of houses, now being vandalised and burnt down, that has changed. Because nothing happened until we got 100 extra Gardaí into Limerick City, who actually tackled the crime rate. And it must be remembered.
And was that part of Limerick Regeneration as such?
Oh, yeah. The city manager said, I'm not doing anything until I get at least 100 extra Gardaí in. And he was right, because we were saying, you're regenerating what? Where? The genesis of the rows with the gangs and things like that, that had its spurt, in large amounts of, and very young people being allowed to take over areas,
Is it true that those Gardaí have drifted away in the meantime?
They have, yeah. We're back down to, I think we have, the last time we spoke to the superintendent, I think he had 2 extra than we had the last time. So that's a major problem. That was a big success. Where in bringing communities together in some instances has been very good. But, you see, there wasn't a one-size-fit-all solution to the problems we had here. I fully agreed, with the demolition of, say, St Mary's Park. Couldn't understand why they were demolishing brand new houses in Wales and South Hill and things like that. The houses in St Mary's Park were built in 1935. The cement at that stage had a lifespan of 70 years. They're gone past their sell-by date. The idea was, and you didn't need rocket science, and Joe, you certainly didn't need a book like this. You know, we had plenty of land down there. You build a row of houses, you demolish a row of houses. You move the people from one thing into the other. And you do that on a phased basis over 5-10 years. That is the solution. Right. Now, you don't have to be a genius.
But what happens in? What happens
is everybody said, you know, this should happen. But, of course, what would we know about it? What would anybody know about it? I mean, when you're faced with things like this, which cost probably €1 million to produce, it's very difficult to argue about.
2.2 million. That plan costs to produce, yeah.
But what's worked? What's worked, Cathal?
Very little has worked, and I just wanted to go back there to the Gardaí. What the Fitzgerald report proposed was we get a minimum of 100 additional Gardaí, and that would be further regeneration areas specifically, not for Limerick, further regeneration areas, so that there would be a 24/7 presence of Gardaí in the area, and that never materialised. They were also supposed to be headed by their own superintendent. So we were supposed to get a special regeneration superintendent. That never materialised either. We got 100 extra Gardaí in the city as people retired. The figures we got extra patrols to some extent, but if we had 24/7 coverage, you'd have to ask yourself, how did so many houses get looted for copper? How did so many houses get burnt out in that period? If we had that kind of Garda coverage. We didn't have that Garda coverage, and this often happened during the day.
But can you point to anything that you would say, yes, that has worked as a result of regeneration?
You'd be talking peace. I mean, the all-weather pitch was a nice touch. Up where I'm living. That was a nice touch. But then again, that isn't accessible to the community. The idea of the all-weather pitch originally was it was going to be built in Clarina Park as a standalone pitch for the kids to play in, to come and go as they pleased. And it turned into a commercial concern, so it's for rent, and you have to pay to get into it.
Okay, guys, stay with us. Jennifer, stay with me too, and we'll take a break and continue this conversation. What's worked and what hasn't in terms of Limerick regeneration so far? Independent Councillor John Gilligan, Cathal McCarthy from Limerick Regeneration Watch are both with me in the studio, and Jennifer O'Brien, who's manager of South Hill Area Centre, is on the line, and we're talking about Limerick Regeneration. And Mike has been in touch. He's tweeted at Limerick Today. Regen has worked in pockets across the city. Youth at Risk funded social programmes, and Extern has supported 40 plus families a year. Come on, Joe, ask the panel with you there. What has Regeneration done for the people in Weston? Nothing. It's a total disgrace up here, says Martina. Hi, Joe, says David. This could have gone a lot smoother if people with the qualifications and experience were managing it. It does not take a lot of skill or management to demolish houses. One subcontractor can bulldoze till the cows come home. It takes a lot more to design, tender, build, hand over and maintain houses. And somebody referring to themselves as Hit and Miss Sports Blog, which I do like, has tweeted at Limerick Today. The demolition companies have made most of the profits from regeneration, and wonder what's going on there. Regeneration has worked in pockets, says another texter. And Marie, we spoke to Marie earlier on, so we won't mention that one again. But I do want to mention Jennifer from South Hill Area Centre that Councillor Joe Ledden told the Limerick Leader that the biggest challenge of the regeneration areas remains South Hill. Do you agree?
I suppose South Hill is, there's so much green space, I think, is the point that Joe was making in that article. And I suppose I'm away at the moment, so I haven't had the chance to see the print edition of the Leader. There is a huge amount of green space, and there has been a huge amount of depopulation within the South Hill community, and the most recent figures from the census would indicate a drop of about 25% of the population within certain parts of South Hill. And I think that is a huge question that we all need to come together to try and answer in terms of the local authority, the statutory agencies, community and voluntary groups, and the community. And so with the work that's gone in at a ground level with different groups, what are the reasons that people still feel that they've little faith in this process, that things are worth hanging around for?
Right, but what would be the success of Limerick Regeneration so far from your perspective?
I think both John and Cathal mentioned the Garda numbers there. I think quite a lot of people in South Hill would have felt that the increase in Garda numbers and the increased community policing for a number of years following the Fitzgerald report really did make an impact on the ground. Unfortunately, those patrols now have cut back in numbers, and we're certainly seeing an increase in antisocial behaviour issues coming up again, kind of in the evenings, and especially with the fine weather and everything. There's lots of kids hanging around, and there's sort of a tendency of that fear when we see groups of young people hanging around together. They're not always doing anything out of the way, but the experience has often been that when people congregate like that something is going to happen.
While I accept, it was technically part of the regeneration plan, you could argue that extra Gardaí is a fundamental in any part of the country, especially one where there are difficulties. So saying that that's the success of regeneration, or that's what you can point to, is a concern, isn't it?
Well, I suppose we shouldn't have to rely on a particular programme to come and highlight the issues in a community like South Hill or like Weston or like Marost or St Mary's. These are communities that have been forgotten for quite a long time within Limerick and nationally as well, we should say. The regeneration programme has allowed a spotlight to be shone on Limerick and to be shone on these communities, and we shouldn't be relying on these things to happen. We should be working with these communities to improve their lot. Ever before any of these issues came into the report, we spent about 2.2 million writing the report. I think there have been a number of social programmes that have worked really well.
Yeah, but the problem is that, it was catch-up, right, to a large degree. Then it was published. There was a promise of 3 billion, and whether you accept, as Cathal says, that some of that wasn't real money as such, but certainly well over 1 billion of it was supposed to be. We've seen a fraction of that spent, so the catch-up hasn't caught up.
No, it hasn't, and I think there's very few people who would argue the point that it has. I think it would be very difficult to say that the communities are treated the same as other parts of Limerick, maybe with maybe different approaches maybe from the local authority. Okay,
Cathal, during the break there, when I was mentioning the areas that are covered by regeneration as Moyross, Ballinacurra Weston, you said parts of Ballinacurra Weston, Joe, South Hill and St Mary's Park. And then you mentioned some other areas that I'd say even the people in them aren't aware are technically part of regeneration.
Yes, in 2008 they amended the ministerial orders to include deposited maps where they redlined the designated regeneration area to define them legally as areas. So, for example, on the south side you have the likes of parts of Rathban, you have Glasgow Park, Kennedy Park, they're all inside the red line. On the north side, next to Maross, you have Ballinanty, and even a bit of Carndavin is inside the red line. Now, the reason it is, and I had this from the horse's mouth from Brendan Kenny at the time in writing, is that they wanted to expand. So when they had finished with the named areas in the legislation, they were going to expand into the actual, within the red line. Now what that red line did, it made it legal for them to board up a house and leave it boarded up indefinitely within that area. Outside the area, it would be illegal to do that. The council is obliged by law to refurbish or relet immediately once it purchases a property. But inside the red line, they were able to leave it there. And as you know, that had a detrimental consequence for the people living in the areas.
OK, I'm going to take another break, and we have another contributor to the discussion right after that.
Limerick Today with Joe Nash on Limerick's Live 95 FM. Limerick Today with Joe Nash on Limerick's Live 95 FM.
Right, we're talking about Limerick Regeneration this morning, what's worked and what hasn't. A listener who wants to remain anonymous says, I'm living in a regeneration area and it seems like houses are being picked at random in terms of which ones to do work on and which not to. People seem to be treated differently. People are not being treated on an equal basis. Regeneration has not worked. I got moved into another house and nothing has worked. They don't want to know, says a listener who's texted us on 53095 for 20 cents. And John says, I just want to know what's being done with the houses near the railway station. Don't get me wrong, I think they've done a fantastic job so far, and it's a difficult task, but those houses shouldn't remain idle either. And that's a call to 461995. And a listener's texted to say regeneration has failed in Limerick City, especially South Hill. There's no point building new houses and new projects in the area if the unsocial minority causing all the issues are still there. It simply won't work until this issue is resolved. It's simple as that. In all fairness, one local contractor made the headlines recently that he was charged with, when we'll get into that, there's a legal action in there, so we're not going to get into that in any more detail. I also want to bring in Seamus Hanrahan now, architect and project manager at Limerick City and County Council's Regeneration Office. Good morning to you, Seamus.
Good morning, Joe.
A lot of concern, Seamus. A lot of people are asking fundamental questions about regeneration. It's 8 years on now from the original plan. What's your view?
Well, I suppose we're 8 years into the programme, and we have to, I suppose, look back at what conditions were like 8 years ago. I think it's fair to say that we were heading to a point in Limerick where social disorder and potentially social breakdown was a very real factor, and was I suppose staring us all in the face. Particularly, I suppose, the incident which triggered regeneration was the arson attack on a car in Myross in 2006. But in the years running up to 2006, 2004, 2005 in particular, social breakdown was a factor. We are in a completely different space in Limerick now than we were in that dark period. And I think a lot of the investment that we see coming into the city now would not have been possible without the work of regeneration over the last 8 years. Now, I suppose people have different focuses in terms of what they look at and what they...
So to be very clear what you're saying here now, Seamus, it's your view that regeneration saved Limerick from social breakdown?
Yeah, I'm saying that parts of Limerick. Now, Limerick is a city of many parts, but parts of Limerick City were in a very difficult place in 2004, 2005 and 2006, and we're heading in a downward spiral without the interventions of regeneration and the considerable interventions of the state in terms of Gardaí and social programmes and so on. The stabilisation period that I suppose was the first period of regeneration would not have been possible, and who knows where we would be today if that hadn't happened.
Okay, so I'll let you both in. Right, but to summarise what he says, the regeneration areas were saved from social breakdown by regeneration.
Utter nonsense. That's utter nonsense. Ballinacurra West and the part they targeted was much better off without regeneration. Now, there was social problems, but those social problems remain. They haven't been tackled. Some of it has been displaced, but it's there for all intents and purposes, still there. And we're worse off. We have more green spaces for antisocial behaviour to activities to occur on.
But what about the violent crime rate and the murder rate and gangland crime?
That's all gone down. That's been a huge change.
Well, but did regeneration save Limerick?
No. That's what Seamus is basically arguing. That's a separate...
I think society had to save itself. If Limerick was going down the tubes, it wasn't just Ballinacurra West and St Mary's Park. We were all going down the tubes, and I think people recognise that very much. But from that particular point of view, I'd have to say that the Gardaí totally transformed what happened in Limerick.
But you see, but there's an argument, John, that if Seamus is right, if Limerick Regeneration saved regeneration areas from social breakdown, you can't get more successful than that.
Oh, I'd be the first to put my hand up and I'd first to accept, and I'm delighted to accept it. It wasn't something that gave it to us. I had to fight like tooth and nail, like 7 days a week, fighting, on behalf of areas, which I saw simply were descending into anarchy. The Gardaí didn't go there, end of story, and it's about time that everybody faced up to that. We were simply... They put a ring around us, and So
did regeneration do that?
Regeneration, was enormously helpful in the question of getting extra Gardaí and in focusing on, we had huge areas, we were sinking and we were waving like hell. At least we did that. And the other point...
I just wanted to call back in for a second. So there is a point of disagreement here, yes. Because...
There is, because I don't believe we ever actually got the extra Gardaí in the way we needed them. We needed that short-term policing to work, and it needed to be intensive. It was never intensive. It was piecemeal. It was occasional. And now it's back to the way it was before regeneration.
But look at our crime rate. Before and our crime rate now, and I don't think anyone would argue that there hasn't been a significant improvement.
Well, there has been an improvement, but we didn't need regeneration for that improvement. And are we including in those crime figures, as Seamus called it, the stabilisation period, the stabilisation that involved the burning out of houses, looting for copper, and that went on Well, apparently we're being policed.
Well, what about Seamus?
The early period of regeneration was a stabilisation period. And in that stabilisation period, construction of new houses wasn't really an option, because it wasn't an option to construct when houses were being burned down beside them.
Sorry, Seamus, why were you knocking down so many of them?
Well, when you have a situation where there's population loss to the extent that there is and was in South Hill and Myross, the population loss in South Hill from 1981 to 2011 was 70%. That is a phenomenal figure for population loss. With that figure comes abandonment of properties, decay, dereliction, properties being used for nefarious activities and so on. So you have more buildings than people to use them. Now, that is
the rationale.
An issue that Limerick needs to look back on, and how did we arrive at that?
The depopulation process actually increased during regeneration. It accelerated. People were being bought out. I mean, Limerick City Council hit the ground running, and I've given as an example Clarina Park in Ballinacurra Weston, an estate that was built in 1996. The houses were only 16 years old. The houses were not their best before date or whatever. These were solid, fantastically beautiful houses. That estate is completely gone and demolished. 49 houses demolished and gone.
On that specific, Seamus, what about that?
Clarina Park has been completely demolished, 49 houses. And we need to look at why that happened. First of all, in terms of the estate design, Clarina Park is a cul-de-sac off a cul-de-sac. Should never have been built in the first place. And you know, the issues that manifested themselves in Clarina Park have... So
just to be clear now, so you're saying that they were knocked down not because of construction issues, but because of social issues?
Partly. There were design issues, I suppose, in terms of the layout. You know, constructing cul-de-sacs, has been problematic.
Well, I've got two people with incredulous expressions on their faces looking at me here.
Yeah. See, one of the major problems we had in Clarina Park, and I do accept, the design was wrong, was we had two ball alleys up there, and I think it took us 6 years roaring and screaming before we had them demolished, because there were people that were gathering inside in this area, and they were literally launching attacks across the road at all various...
So you're saying just the ball alleys would have done the job?
No, the ball alleys... You see, when you make a mistake, the thing is you don't compound the mistake, you try and rectify it. And we were saying, to begin, even if they have any chance of survival, this should have happened. And it didn't happen. And we allowed it to happen. And I find it absolutely...
So do you think the destruction of the houses was right there?
No. I don't think that the destruction of the houses was right. I find it amazing. I was there at the opening of Clarina Park and went around and I saw absolutely top-class houses. They were absolutely wonderful. I walk around there then 10 years, 15 years later, and I find there's nothing there. There's something wrong in society.
I need to take another short break, and I want Seamus to explain that to me afterwards, because I'm confused, I have to say. Right, Seamus, both John and Cahill are saying here there wasn't any logic to knocking those houses down in that particular area.
Okay. Clarina Park would have been the focus for a lot of antisocial behaviour in that part of...
Did they agree with you about that?
Yes.
Yeah. And I suppose estate layouts can contribute to problems of antisocial behaviour. By,
well, John Gilligan has just said the Mill Road in Corbally is a cul-de-sac.
It is, but the Mill Road in Corbally would have buildings that would be positively fronting out onto the spaces in front of them. Whereas in Clarina Park there was lots of blind spots, like the blind spots in the ball alley that John referred to earlier, which can become a locus for antisocial behaviour.
But surely you deal. But hang a sec now. Surely you deal with the behaviour rather than blaming the houses and knocking them down if they were only constructed in 1996.
Well, I suppose you need to take a holistic view on these things. I suppose when you have people that...
I'll be honest with you, James. I've got to be honest with you. I have never seen a house throw a stone at anyone.
No, and I haven't either. What I'm talking about here is that if people within an estate are, effectively crying out to leave an estate when you're in a local authority, then you have some decisions to make, and some of these decisions are very, very difficult. Do you take the, I suppose, pleas of people to leave an area seriously and try and accommodate their wishes? And perhaps the implication of that then is, a depopulation of a particular part of an estate. But these are difficult decisions that local authorities face. There are no easy choices. There
are decisions that don't impact on these decision makers. They don't have to live with the decisions they make. We in the regeneration areas, we have to live with those decisions, Seamus.
Yeah, and I think everybody that is involved in this process is trying to make the right decisions, having regard to all of the factors that are involved. There's factors that affect individuals, there are factors that affect, a wider area, there are factors that affect the whole city and the county. So, the decisions that are made need to be balanced across all factors.
I just want to bring Jennifer back in. She hasn't been in a while. Jennifer, what's the future for regeneration? I suppose lots of people will look back at the last 8 years, and some will see positives and many more will see negatives. But what's next is probably the key question.
I think I suppose just picking up on some of the comments that have been made there already, Joe, I suppose we also need to ask that if we'd never had a regeneration process, would we actually be any better off? And I don't think we would be. I think that focus that the regeneration process put on parts of Limerick has allowed us to, in many ways, very boldly state what some of the problems are. And whilst we haven't necessarily dealt with them in the best way, I think the fact that they are being dealt with in some way, or that we're talking about them.
So you reject the notion then that there's been any paralysis by analysis? Look, when you're dealing with this many kind of upper level departmental figures, I think, there's been a lot of top down decision making coming from outside of Limerick, and that's always going to overanalyze and cause a bit of a stalemate. And I think we have been delayed massively by some of that. But I think unfortunately, Limerick has been really poorly placed in terms of the timeline with the recession and changes in government, and also quite a lot of changes in national policy focus. And I think sometimes we can forget about some of that. You say that, but one of the key positions, if not the key position in government, has been occupied by a Limerick man for the last 6 years, the Minister for Finance.
Well, I certainly wouldn't want to start taking on some of my views on Michael Noonan now this morning, Joe.
Okay.
I think there are certain things we haven't benefited from.
I just want to summarise this, and we'll come back to it both later in the programme and in time to come. But where now for regeneration, John? What, in simple terms, what's the future?
Well, if we've looked at regeneration since its inception, and we're discussing it here, and it is negative. Let's be fair about that. But the one thing that we have to say quite definitely, we can't just wash our hands and walk away from this. I'm a member of the Regeneration Committee. I've been at every meeting. I don't think I've missed even one. And I'm going to remain at that. And I'd also and you have to say within the next 2 years we'll be doing this, the next 5 years we're going doing that. But that was the original plan.
Actually do it. Things are in 12 months.
Yeah, but I showed you the book. It cost over 2 million to produce, and there's nothing of it has happened.
That's the point. What's the future? What is the future for regeneration?
Well, I think community participation is key. Now, we don't really have that at the moment. Residents don't really have a say on the decisions that impact their lives. Can you imagine, Joe, if you lived in a regeneration area and someone decided they're going to knock your house and they didn't bother telling you? If you look at Weston and St Mary's Park, the new plan that they produced, they've targeted people's homes for demolition, and they didn't even go to their door and agree with that beforehand. And they put it out to public consideration.
To interrupt, but the plan that was produced in 2013 was probably the most publicly consulted document ever produced by a local authority in Limerick, or possibly even in the state. There were over 250 public submissions.
Most of them from our organisation.
There was public consultation days in all of the regeneration areas. A book related to each of the regeneration areas was put through every letterbox in the regeneration area. So the consultation has been has been very intense and has been very worthwhile.
Well, that's fine, and I wouldn't disagree with consultation, but what's the future, Carl?
The consultation wasn't honest. I just want to go back to that day. The consultation was honest. If the consultation was honest, I wouldn't have to be knocking on people's doors, Seamus, when the plan came out in September. But the first time I saw it was in September as well, in 2013, and showing them, look, your house is target for demolition. I would advise you to contact the Office of Regeneration and talk to them about it.
What's the one big thing that needs... wait a second now, guys. Hang on. Carl, what's the one big thing that needs to be done? John has at least outlined something.
I think community participation is key. They had it in Fatima Mansions where they actually involved the community at a proper level.
The only problem with that, Carl, is you can do that in the sense that you can bring the community together, you can have them consulting, you can have meetings, and nothing concrete happens.
We're talking about social regeneration. When you give people a say in the decisions that impact on their lives, you see an improvement all round. You were talking about Croyland Park earlier, and there were social problems. The social problems in Croyland Park was not every family wasn't bad. Most of the families were decent in there. They were leaving because of one or two individuals were causing problems, and there was a refusal to tackle them. And instead, they knocked out the house.
Seamus, what is the one big thing that you think needs to happen? Because whatever way you cut this up, there is a lack of confidence.
I think the process needs to continue, taking regard to the three main factors, which are physical, social and economic regeneration. Physical needs to continue to, there's 110 houses built, there's 134 under construction. That needs to keep going. Economic regeneration needs to continue with a focus on employment. There's a social clause in our building contracts that deals with youth unemployment and long-term unemployment. That needs to continue. As does social regeneration and the focus that Cathal speaks of there in terms of community involvement and community engagement and participation. Like, regeneration is not like, a standard, master planning construction type project. There are many facets to it, and all strands need to be put together, and the government focus.
I'm way over time, but John, you're nodding your head and not positively.
No, we have still, at the end of the day, we have houses in St Mary's Park which have passed their sell-by date. That's a fact of life. Our solution to that is we wrap them up and on the outside to try and insulate them. That's not going to stop the dampness coming in underneath. It didn't take a genius to reckon that if a house is past its sell-by date, you knock it and you build a new set, and you simply do it in phases between 5, 10 and 15. A child could have figured that out.
All right.
Our geniuses couldn't.
Can I end on a positive note? Because I should end on a positive note. I live in the oldest regeneration area. Weston Gardens were over 120 years old, and the 3 houses in our block were refurbished to an exceptionally high standard, and the new tenants in there are wonderful.
All right.
So thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much. It was a very interesting debate, and we appreciate all of your participation. Councillor John Gilligan, Cathal McCarthy, Jennifer O'Brien and Seamus Hanrahan.
Limerick Today with Joe Nash on Limerick's Live 95 FM.